It was a cold morning when the news broke. The Department of Justice, long seen as a stalwart of American justice, had issued an arrest warrant for none other than Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Her name, once synonymous with progressive ideals and fiery speeches, was now embroiled in a scandal that sent shockwaves through Washington. The arrest warrant was officially for charges related to alleged corruption, bribery, and mishandling of sensitive government information. The specifics were unclear, but the headlines blared with one undeniable truth: AOC, once a darling of the Democratic Party, was now under investigation by the very institution that had once backed her. The political world was in uproar, but there was someone who had been waiting for this moment: Pam Bondi. The former Florida Attorney General had long suspected that AOC's rise to power was not as clean as it seemed. Bondi had spent years quietly investigating the networks surrounding the young congresswoman, and now it seemed her suspicions were coming to fruition. But what Bondi would reveal in the coming days would expose a system so deeply intertwined with corruption, manipulation, and power games that it could change the future of American politics forever. As the arrest warrant was announced, Bondi held a press conference that would set the stage for the chaos that was about to unfold. The press conference was packed. Cameras flashed as Pam Bondi stepped up to the podium, her face stern but controlled. She was no stranger to political controversy, but today felt different. This wasn't just another speech or media moment, it was a revelation. "I've been following the rise of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez for years," Bondi began, her voice calm but carrying a sharp edge. "And I've seen the telltale signs of a politician who is too eager to climb the ladder, willing to do anything to secure power." The room fell silent. Reporters exchanged glances, their pens poised, waiting for what was to come next. Bondi continued, revealing a web of connections that seemed too intricate to be coincidental. She described how AOC had been linked to a series of high-profile donors, many of whom were known to have questionable backgrounds and connections to foreign entities. According to Bondi, AOC had allegedly used her position in Congress to secure millions in funding for projects tied to these donors, projects that, on closer inspection, seemed to serve no purpose other than to enrich certain powerful elites. "The system has been rigged for years," Bondi said, her voice growing firmer. "And AOC is just one cog in a much larger machine. She's not the first, and she won't be the last, but this time, we have the proof." As she spoke, Bondi laid out documents on the table, a mix of leaked emails, financial transactions, and classified reports that painted a damning picture. There was talk of illegal lobbying efforts, offshore accounts, and hidden meetings in foreign capitals. But what struck the room most was the implication that AOC wasn't just complicit, she had allegedly been one of the key architects of a sprawling network designed to manipulate the political system for profit. The Department of Justice, Bondi claimed, had stumbled upon these connections while investigating a broader network of political corruption, and AOC had inadvertently become the focal point. "What we're seeing today is the collapse of a system that has been corrupted from within," she declared. The implications were huge. If what Bondi was claiming was true, the arrest warrant wasn't just about one politician, it was about uncovering a dark underbelly of American politics. But Bondi's revelations were just the tip of the iceberg. What she revealed next would shake the very foundations of the American political establishment. As the press conference unfolded, the tension in the room thickened. Bondi's claims were explosive, but she wasn't finished. She leaned forward, looking directly into the cameras, as if daring the political world to challenge her. While many have focused on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's rise as a symbol of change, they've overlooked something far more sinister: her connection to a network of operatives working behind the scenes. This is not just about one person or one scandal. This is about a coordinated effort to undermine the very fabric of our democracy, she said. She then dropped the bombshell. Bondi revealed that several influential political figures, both from the left and the right, were allegedly involved in this shadow network. Names were not yet confirmed, but the insinuation was clear: powerful politicians, corporate moguls, and foreign agents had been pulling the strings behind Ocasio-Cortez's rise. And the funding? It wasn't from grassroots movements as many had believed, it was coming from wealthy international interests looking to shape U.S. policy for their own gain. Bondi presented a series of confidential communications between AOC's office and representatives from these powerful interests. Some were encrypted messages, others were plain emails marked confidential and sensitive. One document, which Bondi referred to as the key document, outlined an elaborate plan to funnel money through dark money groups and political action committees that appeared to be independent but were, in fact, controlled by a tight-knit group of global elites. This network goes far beyond AOC, Bondi said, looking directly at the journalists now scrambling to jot down every word. It's a multi-layered system that uses public figures as puppets. They're given just enough power to stay in the spotlight, but their strings are being pulled from somewhere much darker. The room was in uproar. Journalists shouted questions, but Bondi continued, unfazed. She showed more evidence, a series of meeting logs that linked AOC staff to figures involved in shady international dealings. These weren't just political meetings, they were covert operations masked as simple constituent outreach. Some of the meetings, according to Bondi, were held overseas, in places like Switzerland and Dubai, where laws regarding transparency and accountability were far more lax. It's no coincidence that some of these meetings took place in foreign capitals, Bondi continued, her voice now tinged with anger. It's all part of a broader strategy to weaken American sovereignty and make this country's policies susceptible to outside influence. With each new piece of evidence, the shockwaves rippled through the room. The arrest warrant against AOC was no longer just about personal corruption, it was part of a much larger conspiracy involving global interests and shadowy networks, all of which were working to manipulate the American political system from within. Bondi's final words left the room in stunned silence. If you think this is about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, you're wrong. This is about the integrity of our nation. We cannot allow this system to continue, or we will lose everything we stand for. Her speech was a call to arms, and the world knew it. The investigation into AOC's ties to this sprawling political machine had only just begun, but the consequences of what Bondi had exposed would echo through the halls of power for years to come. The days following Pam Bondi's press conference were a blur of breaking news, furious debates, and political shockwaves. The arrest warrant for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, once a curiosity, was now the focal point of a national crisis. The revelation of a vast, dark network that allegedly included figures from both parties sent ripples through the corridors of power. In Washington, the atmosphere was tense. On one side, Ocasio-Cortez's supporters rallied, claiming the entire affair was a politically motivated attack, a smear campaign designed to destroy her career and discredit progressive movements. They argued that Bondi's revelations were based on incomplete or fabricated evidence, a coordinated effort to damage the credibility of one of the most outspoken members of Congress. On the other side, critics of Ocasio-Cortez, many of whom had long been suspicious of her rise, were eager to see the truth exposed. They saw Bondi as a hero, a whistleblower who had finally brought to light the kind of corruption that many had suspected but couldn't prove. Among them were some of the most powerful figures in the Republican Party, who now found themselves in an unexpected alliance with conservative media outlets, all working tirelessly to amplify Bondi's claims. Ocasio-Cortez, for her part, had remained silent in the immediate aftermath. Her legal team quickly went into damage control mode, calling the charges baseless and politically motivated. But the damage had already been done. The arrest warrant, though not yet executed, had created a public relations nightmare. The progressive firebrand, who had once stood as the embodiment of political change, now seemed ensnared in a scandal that threatened to unravel her entire career. In a statement, her office called the allegations absolutely false and promised a full defense. But within the power circles of Washington, whispers began to circulate. Some began to wonder if the truth was far more complicated than anyone had realized. Was Ocasio-Cortez truly a pawn in a larger game, or had she been an active participant in something much darker? The most disturbing part of Bondi's revelation was the suggestion that this system of political manipulation had been in place for years, possibly decades. If the web surrounding AOC was as vast as Bondi had claimed, who else might be caught in it? Who else was being influenced or controlled by the same shadowy interests? And more importantly, how deep did the corruption truly go? The answer was still unclear, but one thing was certain: the political landscape in America had been irrevocably altered. The investigation into AOC had the potential to expose a series of interconnected figures who had long operated behind the scenes, untouchable by traditional means. And as the months wore on, it became clear that this story would not simply fade away. AOC's allies were now scrambling, holding emergency meetings to strategize their next move. But as the political fallout from Bondi's accusations continued to mount, the question on everyone's mind was, how many more names would be added to the growing list of suspects? And who would be the next to fall? The unraveling had only just begun. As the investigation into Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's alleged connections to this sprawling network intensified, something unexpected began to happen. Behind the headlines, an increasing number of whistleblowers came forward, some anonymous, some willing to go public with their testimony. It seemed that the web Pam Bondi had hinted at was even more intricate and dangerous than anyone could have imagined. Among the most shocking of these new witnesses was a former aide to AOC, a young woman named Sarah Clark. Clark had been with Ocasio-Cortez's team since her rise to prominence and had worked closely with some of the key players involved in the questionable meetings Bondi had referenced. In an exclusive interview with a prominent news outlet, Clark painted a picture of the inner workings of AOC's office that sent shockwaves through the political establishment. Things were never what they seemed, Clark began, her voice shaky but determined. At first it was all about the people, about fighting for the working class. But slowly, as the money started pouring in and the meetings with high-profile donors became more frequent, the goals shifted. I began to realize that we weren't just working for the people. We were working for something much bigger. Sarah described late-night meetings where political donors, lobbyists, and foreign actors, some of whom had never been publicly linked to AOC, would appear in her office, often in hushed tones. They would discuss not just policy, but deals. Deals that seemed to involve the exchange of influence, favors, and access. One night, I overheard a conversation between AOC and a representative from a tech conglomerate, Clark recalled. It wasn't just about legislation, it was about shaping the future of entire industries. It was about control. I knew then that things weren't right. But by that point, I was too deep in. I was afraid to leave. Clark's testimony, combined with a growing pile of damning documents, seemed to confirm Bondi's earlier claims. The network Bondi had alluded to wasn't just a figment of conspiracy, it was real, and it was sprawling. But Clark's revelations weren't the end of the story. As more whistleblowers came forward, the picture that emerged was one of systemic manipulation. Ocasio-Cortez, while not the sole architect, had been a key player in an elaborate game of political chess. She had used her rising star power to gain access to crucial policymaking spaces, and in return, she had been rewarded with significant influence, financial backing, and opportunities to benefit from a network that extended far beyond the U.S. borders. The problem was that Ocasio-Cortez was only one piece of the puzzle. As more witnesses came forward, it became clear that several high-ranking figures from both the Democratic and Republican parties were also entangled in this dark web of influence. The revelation suggested a decades-long operation that reached into the highest levels of government, business, and international diplomacy. Bondi, ever the strategist, was now working behind the scenes to help connect the dots. While she had been a fierce critic of Ocasio-Cortez, she began to shift her focus, realizing that the story wasn't just about one politician, but an entire system that had been systematically undermining American democracy for years. "There's a reason why certain people are untouchable," Bondi said in an interview. "They've made sure that the system works for them, and that it works in the shadows. But the truth is finally coming to light. This is bigger than AOC. This is about exposing the entire system. With each passing day, more explosive revelations came to light. Leaked memos. Secret meetings in undisclosed locations. Financial records tracing money back to shell companies and hidden accounts. Every new piece of information painted a picture of a political system that was no longer just broken, it was rotten to the core. But the story wasn't just about exposing the corruption, it was about what would happen next. As the walls began to close in on those involved, questions began to swirl: who would be the first to flip? Which powerful figures would fall? And perhaps most importantly, who would rise from the ashes of this scandal to reshape the political landscape once again? The investigation was far from over, but the answers, dark, disturbing, and undeniable, were beginning to take shape. The hidden hand that had controlled American politics for so long was finally being revealed, and the people would not stand idly by. This was no longer just a political scandal. This was the beginning of a new era in American politics, one that promised to change everything. As the investigation continued to unfold, the sheer scale of the scandal became impossible to ignore. The web of influence that had been intricately woven into the American political system was no longer a conspiracy, it was the reality everyone had to face. The revelations continued to pour in, shaking the political elite to their core. The Department of Justice, under increasing pressure, began rounding up key figures connected to the network, but they moved cautiously, aware of how explosive the situation had become. The first major arrest came as a surprise: a well-known Democratic fundraiser, whose name had been floating around in whispers for years, was detained. He was charged with bribery, money laundering, and facilitating illegal lobbying efforts. His arrest was only the beginning, though, as new indictments were soon handed down to several members of Congress, both Democrats and Republicans. Public outrage was immediate. People felt betrayed, and the trust that had once been placed in their elected officials was shattered. The political establishment, once seen as the defenders of the nation's interests, was now viewed with suspicion and contempt. But as more arrests were made, the questions became sharper: who else was involved? Was this merely the surface of something far more insidious? In the midst of all this chaos, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez remained a central figure. Though her legal team was still vigorously defending her, the arrest warrant loomed over her every move. Her public appearances grew fewer, and she became an almost mythical figure, the face of both resistance and scandal. Some believed she was guilty and deserved to face justice, while others saw her as a victim of a system that had long been corrupt. But then came the turning point. It was a chilly evening when Ocasio-Cortez made a surprise announcement. She scheduled a live broadcast from her office, her face pale but resolute. The world waited in anticipation as she prepared to speak. The cameras rolled, and for the first time since the scandal had erupted, she spoke directly to the American people. "I know many of you have been following the story that's been circulating about me, about corruption and influence," Ocasio-Cortez began, her voice steady but with an underlying tremor. "I want to set the record straight. Yes, I have been a part of a system that is broken. But I did not knowingly participate in the illegal activities that have been alleged. The truth is, I was brought into something that was already far beyond my control. I was manipulated, used as a pawn by those who have been orchestrating the corruption in our government for decades." Her words hit hard. She did not deny the network of influence or her involvement in it, but she painted herself as a victim, caught in the crossfire of a system too powerful and too entrenched for any one person to dismantle. She vowed to cooperate with the investigation and to expose those who had used her for their own gain. "I have made mistakes," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "But the people I need to hold accountable are the ones who have been hiding in the shadows, the ones who pulled the strings all along. It's time to take the power back from them. And I promise you, I will fight until the very end to make sure this system is dismantled." The broadcast sent shockwaves through the nation. Her supporters rallied behind her, claiming that she was finally taking responsibility and showing courage in the face of a system designed to crush her. Her detractors, however, accused her of playing the victim, using the same rhetoric she had once employed to attack the establishment now to shield herself. The pressure on the Department of Justice intensified as public opinion divided. Some demanded immediate charges against Ocasio-Cortez, while others called for a broader investigation into the network that had manipulated her and so many others. Every day brought new revelations, and each one seemed to bring the country closer to an unprecedented reckoning. But the real story was unfolding behind closed doors. With each arrest, each confession, and each leak, more powerful figures were drawn into the web. The Department of Justice had opened Pandora's box, and it seemed there was no turning back. The investigation was no longer just about one politician, it had become a war to uncover the rot at the heart of American democracy. And in the end, the question remained, who would survive the reckoning? The system had been exposed, but the battle for its soul had only just begun. The true cost of the scandal was still unknown, but one thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same again. The game had changed, and the American people were no longer willing to play by the old rules. As the investigation into the sprawling corruption network deepened, the political world found itself caught in a frenzy. Every day, new names were linked to the scandal, and the public's faith in their leaders was crumbling faster than anyone could have predicted. The shockwaves from the arrests of key figures were still reverberating through the halls of power, but now, the real danger lay in what would come next. Among those who had been implicated, there was one name that stood out, Senator William Halloran, a veteran politician with decades of service under his belt. He had been a fixture in Washington, a seasoned lawmaker who had long played the game with a careful balance of power and secrecy. But now, Halloran was at the center of the storm. Bondi and the Department of Justice had discovered that he had been one of the primary orchestrators behind the network, a linchpin in the web of influence that had helped manipulate both parties for years. Halloran's downfall was swift and brutal. The evidence against him was overwhelming: bank records, encrypted communications, and testimony from multiple whistleblowers all pointed to his involvement in funneling money to key political figures, including Ocasio-Cortez, to secure legislative victories that favored international corporations and foreign governments. It was clear that Halloran had been using his position to further his own interests, while masking it as public service. His arrest shocked the political world. He had been considered untouchable, a man who knew how to play the system to his advantage. But now, it seemed that no one was safe. But the fall of Halloran wasn't the only bombshell to drop. As investigators dug deeper into the financial records of the network, they uncovered a shocking connection to foreign powers, specifically, a consortium of Russian oligarchs who had been covertly influencing American politics for years. The discovery sent chills through the country. Foreign interference in U.S. elections was not just an abstract concept, it was an ongoing reality, deeply embedded within the system. It was during one of the most intense Senate hearings that the true scale of the conspiracy began to emerge. A former associate of Halloran, a tech mogul named Samuel Falk, took the stand and delivered a devastating testimony. Falk had once been a close ally of Halloran, but their relationship had soured when Falk had become disillusioned by the extent of the corruption within the political elite. "I helped fund political campaigns," Falk confessed, his voice trembling. "I thought it was just the way things were done. But I didn't know how deep it ran. We were funneling money through shell corporations, working with foreign entities, foreign governments, to influence policy decisions in ways that I can't even begin to describe. I was complicit. And I'm here to tell you, the system is broken. It's not just about money. It's about power. And those who control the power control everything." Falk's testimony was a turning point. He revealed the names of several high-ranking officials who had been working with him and Halloran, names that sent shockwaves through Washington. Some of the names were known figures, others were new to the public eye, but each one had been part of a coordinated effort to manipulate U.S. policies for their own benefit. The details of these revelations were too much for the American public to ignore. News outlets scrambled to report on the testimony, and politicians began distancing themselves from the scandal, fearful of being swept up in the tide of public outrage. Trust in the government had hit an all-time low, and calls for drastic reform rang out across the nation. But even as the net tightened around the most powerful figures in Washington, there were still those who fought back, desperate to protect themselves and the system they had helped build. Legal battles were waged, counterattacks were launched, and every day, the political chess game grew more intense. For Ocasio-Cortez, the pressure was mounting. Her public defense had done little to stem the tide of suspicion. She had become a symbol of the corruption in the system, both a victim and a perpetrator, depending on who you asked. Her supporters rallied, but even they were beginning to question how much they truly knew about the woman they had once admired. Was she an innocent caught in the web of a system far beyond her control, or was she complicit in the very corruption she had vowed to fight? As the investigations continued, Ocasio-Cortez's future hung in the balance. Would she be exonerated, or would she fall like the others before her? The battle for political survival was more brutal than ever, and the ultimate question loomed large: who would emerge victorious in this unprecedented fight for the soul of American politics? One thing was clear: the era of trust in the political elite was over. The reckoning had only just begun, and the final chapters of this story were still waiting to be written. Would justice prevail, or would those in power continue to pull the strings from the shadows? The investigation into the political network had reached its fever pitch. Washington, once a symbol of democracy and power, had become a battleground, a place where alliances crumbled, and the old order began to disintegrate before the eyes of the American people. The air was thick with distrust, and with each passing day, more dark secrets were uncovered. For Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the pressure had reached its breaking point. The once celebrated Congresswoman, who had risen to fame on the promise of revolutionizing American politics, now found herself isolated, caught between those who still believed in her innocence and those who saw her as a symbol of everything that was wrong with the system. The arrest warrant was still pending, and the question remained: was she guilty, or had she truly been a pawn in a much larger game? The final blow came in the form of a series of leaked documents that detailed a secret meeting between Ocasio-Cortez and one of the key figures behind the network, Senator William Halloran. The documents, which had been smuggled out of a confidential investigation, showed Ocasio-Cortez in a private discussion with Halloran, discussing future policy changes that would favor his donors. There was no direct evidence of bribery or illegal activities, but the conversation raised troubling questions about her involvement in the system. Her supporters were divided. Some still stood by her, claiming the meeting was innocuous, a simple political discussion. Others, however, felt betrayed. They had believed in her vision for a more transparent and accountable government, but these documents cast doubt on everything she had fought for. In a final attempt to clear her name, Ocasio-Cortez made one last, desperate public appearance. The stage was set: she would address the nation in a live broadcast, knowing that this could be her last chance to salvage her career. "I stand before you today not as a politician but as a person who has fought tirelessly for justice," she began, her voice strained but determined. "I never intended to be part of a corrupt system. I came to Washington to fight for you, the people. But I now see that the system I entered was already broken. It was rigged. And I was a part of it. But that doesn't mean I am beyond redemption." Her words were raw, a mixture of remorse and defiance. She admitted to her failures, acknowledging that while she had not intentionally engaged in illegal activities, her actions had contributed to the perpetuation of the very corruption she had once vowed to dismantle. She vowed to fully cooperate with the investigation, hoping that, in doing so, she could be part of the solution rather than the problem. But despite her heartfelt plea, the damage was done. The media circus surrounding her only intensified. Her supporters began to splinter, some calling for her resignation, while others clung to the belief that she could still redeem herself. Meanwhile, her opponents saw this as the final confirmation of their suspicions. The Department of Justice, in light of the new evidence, decided to move forward with the arrest warrant. But in an unexpected twist, just as the warrant was about to be executed, Ocasio-Cortez made a final announcement that left the nation stunned. "I will not run from this," she said in a final statement. "But I will step down from my position as a congresswoman. I believe that in order to rebuild this system, we must start with accountability, not just for those at the top, but for all of us. I will cooperate fully with the ongoing investigation, but I am stepping aside to allow for true change." It was a bold and controversial move, one that left the country divided. Some hailed her decision as an act of courage, a final acknowledgement that the system needed to be reformed from the inside out. Others saw it as a surrender, a concession that she was just another casualty of a political machine that had consumed her. With Ocasio-Cortez stepping down, the focus shifted back to the broader investigation. The arrests continued, and the network of corruption began to unravel completely. Senators, CEOs, lobbyists, and foreign operatives, all of them were caught in the web, their lives and careers shattered by the truth. In the end, the scandal did lead to sweeping reforms. The political system was never the same again. Campaign finance laws were tightened, and new transparency measures were put in place to limit the influence of outside interests. But the scars of the scandal remained. Trust in the system was forever broken, and the question of who could truly be trusted with power lingered in the minds of the American people. The fall of Ocasio-Cortez and the exposure of the corrupt network that had controlled American politics for so long marked the end of an era. It was a stark reminder that in the world of politics, no one, not even the most well-intentioned, was immune to the forces that shaped power. As for Ocasio-Cortez, she faded from the public eye, choosing to live a quieter life, away from the spotlight. Her name, once synonymous with hope and change, had become a symbol of both the promise and peril of revolution in a system too entrenched to be easily toppled. But the story didn't end with her. The fight for reform continued. The political landscape had been irrevocably altered, and a new generation of leaders would rise to carry the mantle of change. Whether they would succeed where Ocasio-Cortez had faltered remained to be seen. The reckoning had come. The question was, what would come next?